In chapter 5, he takes it up again. He says, those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. The more you have, the more people come to help you spend it. So what good is wealth, except perhaps to watch it slip through your fingers? People who work hard sleep well, whether they eat a little or much. But the rich seldom get a good night's sleep. Yes. The anxiety that comes into our lives when we pursue something like wealth. We all come to the end of our lives as naked and empty-handed as on the day we were born. We can't take our riches with us. Well, that does make it kind of meaningless right at that point, doesn't it? If you started with nothing, and you're going to end with nothing, then how much difference does it make if you had this huge pile of gold in the meantime? It's all temporary. Yes, that does make it meaningless. That's totally meaningless, pointless. He says, and this too is a pretty serious problem. People leave this world no better off than when they came. All their hard work is for nothing, like working for the wind. Throughout their lives, they live under a cloud, frustrated, discouraged, and angry. Wow. So that was what it was like to have everything you could imagine, but to have turned away from God. Yes, he's not centering his life at all around God. Well, at the end of this book, he finally comes full circle and says, actually, having that heart for God is what matters, and that's not this other stuff. And so Solomon just totally lost it. There's a saying I heard many years ago. Somebody said, in one sense, you can't really break God's laws. You can just illustrate them. And I think I know what this means. It's like we saw Solomon broke every law that had been laid down for kings. He just went straight against everything that God taught. And what he becomes is he really wasn't getting away with anything, because the emptiness, the empty shell of life just becomes kind of an illustration of why God said that, to do that in the first place. Why God prescribed a certain way of life was so that we could have life to the full. When Jesus came, he said, I came that people that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. And so God puts forward moral restrictions. And it's not to hold us down at all. It's because the thing that we think in our deluded, sinful state is going to lead to a happy life is actually just going to be what he calls vanity, meaninglessness, that complete empty. It's like chasing the wind, pointless as anything could possibly be. And so, at the end of Deuteronomy, we see these warnings about where God says, those who hear the warnings of this curse should not congratulate themselves thinking I'm safe even though I follow the desires of my own stubborn heart. In other words, I can do whatever I want. Look, I'm getting away with it. Nothing's happening. He says this would lead to utter ruin. He says, for the Lord will scatter you among the nations from one end of the earth to the other. There among those nations, you'll find no peace or place to rest. The punishment that God had prescribed if the people turned away from. A punishment which, as this book was written, had been executed. And they were now exiles in another land. But then there's that one last reading that we see in Deuteronomy 30, where God also says, if at that time you and your children return to the Lord your God, and if you obey with all your hearts and all your soul and all the commands I've given you today, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes, and He will have mercy on you, and He will gather you back from all the nations where He scattered you. Even though you're banished to the ends of the earth, the Lord your God will gather you back from there and bring you back again. And so, in addition to these warnings, we find the message of grace. The message of grace is that, if you go wrong and turn away from God, that's going to be bad. Okay? There's just no way that that's going to be a good thing in your life. You can try to pleasure yourself in whatever mythical, belief set that you've bought into. None of it will work. It's all going to be completely empty and void. And you should know that. But he says, at any time then, no matter how bad it got, you can turn back to the Lord and He will rescue you. Now, in their case, of course, their covenant included the land and all that, and so He did return them, and they came back to their land. And this has happened again in our own day, where Israel once again has been regathered from the world and has been brought back into existence again, as is promised in multiple places in the Old Testament. And so there's the firmness of God that I'm not going to accept this disloyalty, but at the same time there's the grace of God that if you change your heart and come back to me, then I'll receive you and I will forgive you.